1975 are a UK pop rock band who have been at it since around 2013, I believe, was when they broke out big with a few hit singles such as Chocolate Girls and a couple of others. Wasn't ever that huge on them, to be honest, especially their album output. I think they pile a lot of tracks in their albums, and it ends up being pretty long, pretty drab overall, but they have occasionally got a good few singles. I'll give them that. A couple of decent tracks on the first album. Then the last album had Love Me, I think was pretty good, and also The Sound, which I think is their best song so far. A fun, catchy 80s throwback tune that reminded me of that Shut Up and Dance song, which came out around the same time actually. Just two tracks that I just find really fun, really energetic, really nostalgic for a time period, which is a bit of an easy cash grab to do these days, but when it's done right, you get a good tune. And this new album, A Brief Inquiry into OK Computers, is the supposed best album yet. Critics have been throwing their praise onto this one. And look, it's like with anything. If there's a lot of praise going on to something, you just wait until you come around to it yourself. You don't throw in any expectations. Well, you can, but you try and stay level-headed. You don't want to be like, okay, everyone's loving this, so I'm going to end up hating it, or vice versa. You've just got to try and go into something with just mild expectations, hoping that what everyone's saying won't impact what you think. And with this album, I must say, it's certainly a surprising one to see, getting so many high scores from your pitchforks, your enemies, consequences of sounds, all those places. It's a bit of a baffling one because I don't really know if this is the album that's suddenly their huge magnum opus. Sure, I'll give them this. I'd say it's their best album yet, and actually has some pretty decent high points on this album that I wasn't expecting, but thematically, I don't think it hits, honestly. First of all, I think the Radiohead comparison that's being thrown around at the moment is a bit far-fetched, but at the same time, I can't help but deny that there might actually be an influence on this album. I mean, there is certainly a technology aspect to this album. There is certainly this idea of perhaps we're getting too much sucked into the online world. Perhaps, things aren't what they seem. It's a bit annoying at times, but I think the overall theme isn't terrible. Musically, at times, they're venturing off into very different sounds. It is experimental for them. They've definitely gone all out and tried something different, which I kind of have to give them credit for. The comparisons people are going to draw up are definitely going to be acts like Joy Division, especially on Give Yourself a Try, as well as Radiohead on a few tracks, I think, and also Burial, I think, on the fourth track, How to Draw, which is perhaps one of the most interesting tracks I think this band may have ever made, honestly, in the sense that it's totally out of left field for them. It sort of feels a bit out of place for the album, to be honest. I will say this, it's not particularly all that invigorating, unfortunately. I can appreciate them trying this electronic sound, which is completely out of left field, but it's one of those cases where if I was 15, 16 and, I was just getting into music, this perhaps would sound amazing, but because I've heard a lot of music at this point and a lot of this style done better, it's just a case of similar to Give Yourself a Try, although I think what they're going for here just doesn't get executed all that well. I kind of find what they're doing with this track pretty cool. I like that riff when it opens up, but then it just goes on and on and on, and it never stops, never slows down, never changes up, and it gets grating eventually. Two Time sees them venturing off into more accessible, dancey tunes that you'd get in the charts maybe, a bit of that dancehall vibe, a bit of that Latin vibe too, but the auto-tune on his vocals are pretty bad overall, and even as a singer, he's not the greatest singer I've ever heard. He's certainly not bad though. So I just don't know why they needed to slather that on his voice, like, of all people's. It makes sense when you hear it on a pop song, because the pop singer is some awful, singer that can't sing without having something correcting their voice to make it sound better than it actually does. Like, that makes sense then. It never really sounds very good, but it at least makes sense. But in this case, I just feel like it's one of the most out of place moments I think I've heard on an album in a long time. And stylistically, it's another moment where the album just ventures off into something that's a bit out of left field. Cohesively, this album isn't quite strong, I wouldn't say. Love It If We Made It. If you remember, I did react to this way back when. 1975 fans ripped me apart. Look, I'll take the song from a surface level and say that lyrically, maybe I was reading too much into it at the time of the reaction, because, I think it is clear to see that they are just throwing out as many words as they can, which is very indicative of today's times. But musically, I can't say I'm into it. I just think, again, their influences are drawing upon, artists like The Cure from their 80s output, I think it's just too plain as day. And if I hadn't have heard The Cure before, maybe this would sound great, but it just doesn't. Perhaps the comparison isn't that strong, but if you listen to tracks from Head on the Door, I think you would see where I'm coming from with this comparison if you've never heard that album before. And please do go listen to it if you never have, because it's so good. Now don't worry, I am going to get into the lyrical themes at some point, but I just want to kind of run down the track's sound and styles, because I think it's an important thing to talk about with this band, because they're very versatile with what they go for. This is nothing like what you heard on the last album, and their debut album as well is completely different. I think people need to give them credit for at least jumping around as many sounds as they can. But to do it all in one album, I mean, I've only really mentioned 4 or 5 songs so far, and every track I've mentioned is completely different to the next one. And this is all coming in the first 5, 6 tracks. It's just kind of odd to do as much as you can in such a short amount of time. It doesn't feel completely all over the place, but it certainly has some elements that definitely should have been dropped, as I said, with like 2 time, 2 time, 2 time and that. From Love It If We Made It, we get to Be My Mistake, which is this acoustic ballad, again jumping to a different style kind of seamlessly. I mean, it's a fine, nice little track, I suppose. Nothing really stands out in any kind of way, but I can't really have any complaints, because it's just a nice little ballad. It just doesn't really do that much for me, though. Sincerity is scary, though. Might be the first highlight we get to, I think, with this album. I really like the gospel chorus with the another moment that comes out of nowhere, but considering at this point I've kind of accepted that this is a buffet of an album where you pick and choose as many things to throw onto that plate as you possibly can, even if you may be completely full and ill by the end. You get what I'm saying. I mentioned the auto-tune earlier on with 2 time, 2 time, 2 there, but mate, it gets worse when they try using it again. Ugh. I like America and America likes me. I mean, Jesus Christ. They are some of the moments that you hear from coming from his vocals at times. Just so messy. Like, even like melodically, this track works in no kind of way. And then you have these vocals just being thrown at you. Jesus Christ. After this point, I think the album loses any kind of momentum it once had. I mean, the momentum was already bumpy and a bit all over the place with these styles that they were going for, but at least I had something to focus on with each of those tracks. But second half, I mean, I'm just lost. Apart from It's Not Living, which I will call the best track on the album, which is funny because it actually sounds a lot like their hit from a few years ago, The Sound. It has that 80s synthesizer heavy sound that really builds up a nice steady groove, nice little bit of fun danciness. Yeah, honestly, it's a really fun tune, but like everything else surrounding this track, you should just throw away because there's just nothing worth talking about here. Mine is another slow, tepid, uninteresting ballad that I couldn't even bring myself to try and talk about because there's just nothing to say. And they go into the most blatant 80s cheesy ballad I think they could have possibly thrown at us. Why this is here, I don't know, but musically it is icky as fuck. Just cannot bear to sit through this sound. You'll know what I mean when I say 80s because it just sounds so of its time from that period that you can't escape it. There's a reason why this style of music kind of died away and aged pretty terribly, so I don't know why you'd go for this sound, especially when you got it right earlier on with your It's Not Living track, which comes from a similar era. I just don't know why they'd do this. And closing track, I Always Wanna Die Sometimes, is again a gross ballad that sounds very similar to an Oasis song circa 1996. Couldn't care less about this. Like, honestly, I can't bring myself to talk about these few tracks because I can't even... Not only is the title and the way he sings it just a complete oxymoron, it just makes me cringe a little bit listening to him sing in this style. And the friggin' key change in Couldn't Be More in Love, just to let you know now, I hate key changes. Like, there are some key changes that work, but 90% of the time I will wince and throw my phone at the wall if I hear a key change. Musically, pretty inconsistent. Some great moments that I genuinely think are being a bit underrated and a bit underappreciated by, you know, your typical music nerds that are calling this the worst album like of the year or whatever, which is just a bit hyperbolic for me, but at the same time, to call this great is a bit of a reach too. They're either borrowing heavily from other sounds and eras, or they're just not making melodically instantaneously memorable music. So what about the lyrics? What about this whole theme, this narrative that's surrounding the album? Well, I don't know. I really don't get much from it. A lot of references to today's society, how we live in this modern era, how we can maybe rely on the internet too much. We get that on the interlude track. This is painful to listen to, honestly. Man Who Married a Robot is a track where, look, I get it. A lot of people are addicted to the internet, addicted to their phones. But when you just throw it out there so on the nose in the way that this track does, this friggin' robotic voice reading from a fucking manuscript or whatever, like, it's just so painful. Telling the internet I love you and the internet tells you back that I love you too. The man eventually dies a lonely life because he did nothing but spend time on the internet watching porn or whatever. Yeah, like... could you just not take the most extreme argument you possibly can to show how bad the internet is? Yeah, it might sound bad when you word it all like that, but it doesn't really happen to the average person, does it? Everyone out there is like sucked into the interwebs, man. Oh, I can't escape Facebook. Not everyone out there is like that. Not everyone. Even if they were, what is your whole statement on this anyway? You know, you jump around different track to track mentioning about love and what it can do to you. I like America, America likes me is, you know, makes a bit of a reference to like the gun policy in America and stuff like that right now. The last few tracks are just ballads essentially. What are you saying with your concept here? Like, I just don't think it's very clear cut, and even if you were to read into it, I don't think it would change the songs anyway, because they're not particularly that great as standalone tracks. I think the album suffers in the cynicism that it presents nearly every moment. Even Give Yourself a Try has this awkward feeling surrounding it that I just can't feel like I'm attaching myself to. Talking about getting STDs at 27 and a 16-year-old taking her life and baby boomers like me. Like, everything here is just all so... like the baby boomers reference as well, it's just all kind of appealing to a very specific demographic. That's what the 1975 do. And this cynicism surrounding their tracks, I'm not here for. Love It If We Made It as well. It's just all so cynical. And yeah, sure, you've got to be realistic. You know, not a lot of things going on are great. There's a lot of shit in the world, for sure. And making reference to it is absolutely welcoming. You know, it's fine to make note of these things that are going on and be aware of them. The way Mike Healy does it though is just excruciatingly cynical, like especially on track like Love It If We Made It, the way he's referencing everything. He's not really offering out a solution, he's just kind of saying things like, yeah, this is what happens these days. Well, yeah, it does, you're right. It's that targeting of that specific online activist type person that their music is clearly ready and able for. I think he thinks he's doing something, but he's really not doing anything, and that kind of makes it more annoying to listen to. Especially that interlude track, like it says nothing whatsoever. So a guy dies when he's old and all he did on it all his life was attach himself to the internet. That's so empty, because you can actually get a great deal of great things from the internet. So if you're just gonna present it in a way where everything's bad about it, then it's incredibly biased and it adds nothing to the conversation and has nothing to say. So generally with this album, it's hit and miss, because there are some good tracks, but much of the time I think Matty Healy just needs an attitude change, an attitude adjustment at least. It's too cloudy, like it's just, this is how it is, there's nothing good to come from it, and we can't do shit, we're gonna progress through life and everything will probably turn out shit in the end, and that's it. That's what I get from the guy, and that's what I get from the album too. Nothing is being said, it's just an attempt to comment on the current day in society without showing the good side of things. If you were to do this exact same album and add a positive energy to it somewhere, I think I'd be on board, but not really here. However, though, I can't really say I found much of it to be bad, only a few moments, but the good moments were pretty damn high, to be honest. I'm gonna go 5 out of 10. I think that's the fairest score I can go with. Don't know, let me know your thoughts on this album. It really annoyed me at times, and at other times baffled me, but overall I guess it's pretty average for what it is. However, though, I will say it's an improvement from the last album. I think they're getting somewhere with their sound. They just need to clean it up a bit and try and hone it in and make it a bit more consistent, you know? Subscribe to the channel for more reviews if you like this. Have a good day. Let me know your thoughts on this album. Goodbye.